to Unit 2 of our financial market course, still under interest rate structures and the rationale for financial markets. In this session, which is session 2, we are looking at the term structure of interest rate. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain why securities with different maturities have different interest rates, explain and also construct the yield curve, and also explain the different theories that help explain the shape of the yield curve. Then you should be able to forecast future interest rates based on interest rates for securities with different maturities. So I want to start by considering what is meant by term structure, and then we'll then look at the yield curve. So term structure refers to the relationship between interest rates and the term to maturity of a security. So we want to find out how much interest to be charged on a loan, and then the maturity period of the security. So try to find the interest rates that should be charged on the loan as well as the maturity period of that loan is what we call the term structure of the security. So the yield curve is a plot of the interest rate and the term to maturity of the securities, mainly based on government securities. So we are saying that the yield curve is a plot which gives us an idea of the interest rates to be paid on a particular loan, and they are based on the maturity periods of these securities, and the baseline for getting the interest rates as well as their maturity periods is attributed to government securities. So when interest rates are plotted against the term to maturity, the shape of the curve that result can take three different forms. So it could be an upward sloping curve, a downward sloping curve, and a flat curve. So the yield curve will be upward sloping if long-term securities have high interest rates than short-term securities. So we are saying that our yield curve can give us three different types of plots, and the first one is the upward sloping curve, where the long-term securities have a higher interest rate than the short-term securities. And we also have the downward sloping curve. So with a downward sloping curve, it occurs when investors expect future interest rates to decrease. And finally, with a flat yield curve, it results when short-term and long-term securities have a similar interest rate. So based on the interest that is being charged and the maturity period, you are likely to fall under either an upward sloping curve, a downward sloping curve, or a flat curve. So with the upward sloping curve, we are saying that there's a long-term security involved, and because the security is long-term, investors presume that there's a higher rate of default. That is why a higher interest rate is charged on the loan. And with the short-term securities, they normally fall under the downward sloping curve. And a flat yield curve occurs when the short-term and long-term securities have a similar interest rate. So with the flat interest or the flat yield curve, we are saying that based on an investor's assessment of the credit ratings of a consumer, they can charge a variety of both long-term and short-term loans granted to consumers a very low interest or a similar interest rate, because they may have a greater chance of repaying the principal amount as well as the interest. So this figure shows our yield curve. So we can see that we have the upward sloping curve. We have the upward sloping curve. So from 1 to 6 years, or for the 6th year, we are seeing that the interest to be paid on the loan is also very high. That is, we are paying 9.2% on the amount being loaned out, and you can see that the maturity period is also very long. So 6 years, and then you are paying 9.2 on the principal figure. And with the downward sloping curve, so here we have 3 years, and for 3 years the amount being paid is 7.6, which is relatively lower as compared to the upward sloping curve, which has a longer maturity period as well as a higher rate of default. And finally, we have the flat sloping curve, or the flat curve. So with the flat curve, you realize that different investors with different maturity periods pay the same interest rate. So someone has a 1-year maturity period, another person has a 3-year maturity period, another 5, and the other 6. And you realize that they are all being charged the same amount of interest, that is 5%. So as I've earlier shared, investors would determine the interest rate to be charged based on the ability of the borrower to pay the principal figure as well as the interest on time. So after considering their circumstances and characteristics individually, they assign the interest rates to these individuals. And we also want to look at some theories guiding the yield curve. So basically there are 3 theories that supports the yield curve. So the first one is unbiased expectation theory, the liquidity premium theory, and the market segmentation theory. Okay, so with the unbiased expectation theory, it says that the shape of the yield curve reflects future expectations about interest rates. So with the unbiased expectation theory, we are saying that if the curve is upward sloping, it means that investors expect interest rates to increase in the future. And we know that with an upward sloping curve, it has a higher maturity period as well as a higher interest rate. Hence, investors will charge more interest. And for a downward sloping curve, according to the expectation theory, investors expect future interest rates to decrease. That is why relatively a lower interest to be charged on a maturity period. And for a flat yield curve, according to the expectation theory, means that investors expect future interest rates to remain constant at today's level. So no matter the amount of years you are going to borrow, or they are going to lend to you, realize that the interest rates being charged to different investors are the same. So basically with the expectation theory, we are saying that the yield curve reflects future expectations about interest rates. So if the future expectation about a particular interest rate is upward sloping, it means that investors expect the interest rate to increase in the future. So since they want to benefit from the increased interest rates, they are likely or they normally charge a higher interest rate to long-term borrowers. And if based on their expectations, if they assume that the interest rates will decrease in the future, therefore implying a downward sloping curve, investors will also decrease their interest rates just so that they can attract more people to their markets. And if they expect that in the future there will be no change in the interest rates, you realize that according to the expectation theory, no matter the number of years you are borrowing, the same interest rate will be charged to different borrowers within different maturity term periods. So I want to move on to the liquidity premium theory. So the liquidity premium theory is actually a build up on the unbiased expectation theory. So the liquidity premium theory says that short-term securities have higher liquidity rates than long-term securities. So investors have to compensate themselves by charging a higher interest rate for long-term holdings of their securities. So since investors presume that short-term securities are more liquid than long-term securities, a lower interest rate is charged for short-term securities, but due to the fact that long-term securities are not easily converted into cash, you realize that investors will tend to charge a higher interest rate just so that they can compensate themselves with the longer maturity periods. So investors preference for liquid securities implies that short-term and long-term securities are not perfect substitutes. So here we are saying that because of the differences in investor preferences, they are saying that short-term and long-term securities are not perfect substitutes. So you can't compare the interest of a short-term security to a long-term security. That is why the interest rates terms or the interest rate values for long-term securities differ from that of short-term securities. So the liquidity premium theory also assumes that the amount of the liquidity premium increases with the maturity of the security. That is, a 15-year bond would have a higher liquidity than a 10-year bond. So basically, with the liquidity premium theory, we are saying that the more you keep the loan, the more you pay interest. So those who would want to go in for a longer term loan will have to pay more as compared to those who would want to keep short-term loans. So finally, with the market segmentation theory, it also assumes that different securities with different maturity periods are not perfect substitutes, just as the liquidity premium theory. Here we are saying that the investors demand securities based on their future cash needs. So therefore, securities that match their future cash needs are what they consider. So they don't rely on expectations, but interest rates are charged on securities based on the investor's personal future cash needs. So unlike the unbiased expectation theory, which mainly depends or is determined by the expectations of the future markets or the future happenings, and the liquidity premium theory, which focuses on the ability of the asset to be easily converted into cash. The market segmentation theory focuses on the investor's personal need. So based on the investor's future cash needs, the investor charges the interest rate. So it could either be higher or lower based on the investors. So we finally want to consider how investors forecast interest rates. So managers of financial institutions use forecasts of interest rates to determine the interest rates to charge on a new loan. So below is the formula for forecasting interest rates. So first, I exponent E subscript T plus 1 is today's expectation of interest rates on a 1-year treasury bill. So the interest rates that we are going to charge on a 1-year old treasury bill. So we are saying that to calculate for that, so it's more like you're calculating for the interest rate to charge on a future bond which is being held for 1 year. You have 1 plus I subscript 2t, and I subscript 2t refers to today's interest rate on a 2-year bond, on a 2-year treasury note, all squared plus 1 plus IT minus all minus 1, and IT here is today's interest rate for 1-year treasury notes. So we are saying that to calculate for the interest rate for a future 1-year treasury notes, you need today's interest rate on a 1 plus today's interest rate on a 2-year treasury note, all squared, divided by 1 plus today's interest rates for a 1-year treasury bill minus 1. So with this formula, you should be able to calculate for the treasury or the interest on a treasury note in the future using either the expectation theory, the liquidity premium theory, or the market segmentation theory. Also, all too soon we've come to the end of session 2 of unit 2, and under this session we've learned that the maturity of a security also influences the level of interest rates that is demanded. I've also learned the theories underpinning the interest rates being charged. We've learned about the expectation theory, the market segmentation theory, as well as the liquidity premium theory. And we've also had an idea of how to calculate for a future interest rate on a loan. Thank you for your attention, and see you in our next session. Bye.